Go ahead and get us started. I'd like to call to order our audit committee meeting for MARTA this Thursday, May 16th, 2024. Thank you everybody for attending. We have a very short agenda today, but we do have some important things to cover. So the first item on the agenda is approval of the March 21st, 2024 audit committee meeting minutes. Can I get a second for the meeting minutes? Okay, it's been moved and second. All right, are there any questions? Hearing none, I call the question. Can we vote on the minutes? Okay, the minutes have been approved. The next item on the agenda is a briefing, MARTA FY24 internal audit engagement. Brad Shelley, partner with Crow LLP. Brad, you have the floor.
All right, thank you very much. Good to be with you all this morning, and just wanted to spend a few minutes going through the plan for this year's external audit for the fiscal year 24, so June 30, 24. We are in the planning stages of that. We've done a little bit of testing so far, and we'll talk through the timeline, but this is a good time to be able to convene and discuss that and get any questions or feedback from the committee. So if you want to advance this slide, a couple of slides. Just listed out some of our key engagement team members here. So obviously myself, Brad Shelley, I'm the audit partner. I've been the partner on this, I think, for 3 years now, and I've been involved in the audit for the past 7 years, I think it is. Catherine Brothers, you may recall, she has co-presented with me in the past as a senior manager. Stacy Kernow as a manager. We also have team members below her from Crow. And then we have Tim Watson as a partner from Benford Brown and Associates. That is our certified DBE subcontractor. So glad to be working with them again this year. As far as the deliverables, these have not changed. These are the same that we provided in the past. So we're providing an independent auditor's report, providing a management letter, which would communicate any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses if we have any. We will also provide a SAS 114 letter, which is the required communications to you all. The second part of this is the federal compliance audit, or the single audit. So related to that, we'll issue a couple of reports. One is in accordance with government auditing standards, and then the second is our independent auditor report over each major federal program. Then we'll also issue an in relation to opinion on the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. That's just your listing of all the federal expenditures during the year. That also drives which major programs we test for this audit. And then once that's completed, we will assist in the certification of the data collection form to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. The last deliverable listed here is the agreed upon procedures report that we do for the National Transit Database. So that is, again, a required report that is done annually, looking at your different types of information, both financial and operating data that's submitted to the FTA. On this slide, this lists out some of our approach. It's kind of a high-level, similar approach to previous years, I would say, from a high-level standpoint. Obviously, each year is unique as far as transactions, balances, so we do make sure that we're looking at those. We do go through a risk assessment process internally. Part of that is through discussions with management, through discussions with you all, if there's any new risk that we need to be thinking about considering for our audit. And then we will also, like I said, do our own risk assessment to see if anything has changed there. The overall audit process here can be kind of broken down into 4 segments. So the first segment is our planning. This is where we're doing a lot of that risk assessment, laying out the audit timeline, looking at what the timeline is for deliverables, things of that nature. We'll also then move into the risk analysis, and that's really where we're doing a lot of our interim testing. That's where we're going to be looking at internal controls, corroborating some of those controls, understanding if there's been changes in the controls or the personnel. Later on, we'll get into the field work and testing. That's where we'll do most of the substantive and compliance testing. That'll happen mostly in August and September timeframe. And then we'll finish up with the reporting and the filing, and that's when we will review the financial statements, issue our opinions, and then report back to this committee. Go to the next slide. Digging a little bit deeper into our audit approach. I already talked about the internal controls, so I won't go into that anymore, but there are 2 new accounting standards this year to be implemented. There seems to be at least one every year. This year, fortunately, the 2 that are required to be implemented should not have any impact on your financial statements, not expected to be anything significant. GASB 99, the Omnibus, is really just kind of a collection of smaller, I'll call odds and ends. So going through that, I don't anticipate any issues or implementation issues there for MARTA. And then GASB 100 just covers if there were to be any accounting changes or error corrections. So hopefully we won't identify any errors from previous years that need to be corrected, or any significant changes from previous years. That's really what that is primarily focused on. So the finance team will get a little bit of a breather this year as they work through and prepare for the audit. The federal grant funding, again, that's I mentioned previously the 2 reports that we'll issue related to that, and we will be testing most likely the federal transit cluster again this year. That typically is the major program that we're testing, and that's what we're anticipating testing again this year. And then some of the traditional risk areas: cash, capital assets, debt, pension, revenue. Some of those have been added on through the years now. The leases, we'll be continuing to take a look at those as things change. Last year, you may recall GASB 96 and the SPEDAs, the subscription agreements. We're taking a look at those. So all of those same areas that you'd think of during an audit, we'll be testing those obviously as well. If you go to the next slide, this just gives you the timeline that we've discussed with management. As I mentioned, we've already completed our interim field work. That started at the end of last month, and that has been completed now. I think we still have a couple of open items that we're working through on our end, wrapping up the testing, but generally done there. Year-end field work will start August 19th, and then once we get into October, that's where you'll see some of the back and forth on the financial statement review process as we make sure that we tweak and get everything just like we need to for the financial statements. We will then deliver the final draft of the financial statements to them November 1st. That'll be the report that you'll look at in the November meeting, and then after the meeting we'll finalize that. We'll plan to then finalize the full ACFR December 11th. Go to the next slide. These next 2 slides are really specifically for this committee. As you may recall, every year we go through this process, and I said from the beginning, we go through a risk assessment process, and so we want to make sure we understand any concerns that the committee might have, and specifically any concerns around fraud, either suspected or known fraud that the committee may be aware of. We'll make similar type of inquiries to various management members and other team members throughout MARTA as well. But some of these are listed here. I'm not going to go through all of the questions here, but these are the types of questions that we'll be asking management, just to again make sure that we're doing our due diligence there. I always want to remind the audit committee, as we're planning our audit, we don't plan the audit to identify all instances of fraud. That would be a much greater task. That would be more of a forensic audit. What we're focusing on is material instances of fraud. We're trying to identify anything that comes up through the audit process, and we'll make you aware if we identify anything, but we're primarily focused on trying to identify anything significant or material. If you go to the next slide, yep, there we go. So some of the things that we have identified as potential fraud risk, and I want to make sure it's clear, these are just risks, and from a general standpoint, not anything that's necessarily specific to MARTA or that we feel like is a higher level of risk than anything else. But, you know, from looking at transit agencies and understanding how they work, some of these risk misappropriation of assets, undisclosed related party transactions, improperly applied employee compensation and benefits, loss of funds due to hacking, phishing, those types of scams that are done both potentially externally and internally. Data breaches, misuse of restricted funds, those are some of the things that we look for. Try to make sure that we plan, again, to identify any material levels of risk or of fraud related to those. So with that all said, looking at that, I don't know whether we want to pause here if anyone has any concerns about fraud, any known suspected fraud, or other risks that maybe you think that we should take into consideration for this year's audit. Happy to pause and take any feedback the committee has at this time. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Pond.
I've got one question. It may be appropriate for the next section where Emil talks, but to me, I think when you start talking about loss of funding or funds, maybe not intentional fraud, but with these large contracts of overhead and time and materials, hours billed, do you give that any specific sampling, or is that, I know you work with the internal staff on that, but that to me is where the large money would be. So.
You're correct. That's where you have more potential for probably, I call it the external fraud, or some, even if it's not fraudulent, maybe it's misrecording of timesheets, of costs, those types of things with construction projects. I think generally internal audit handles looking at those, so we don't do a lot of work around there. What our work is focused on is more, is the information that they've provided, is that what's been recorded? Because it takes a couple of steps. You got to do a few more steps along the way to really trace back to root level documents from multiple subcontractors or things like that. That really kind of goes into more of a construction audit, which is a separate engagement. So we do some of those sometimes. I think internal audit would typically handle those here for MARTA. We do look at the contracts, and we do a sample of some of the contracts, but not to that level that you're talking about there. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any contact with the FTA directly when you're doing this audit?
Not generally. We may sometimes have conversations or may pass along information between the FTA and MARTA, especially when it gets to the NTD testing. That's where
NTD, tell me what that is.
That National Transit Database.
Okay.
That's where we do some reporting. There's specific procedures that the FTA requires all transit agencies over a certain size to perform to have an outside party perform on an annual basis that looks at financial data, but also looks at operating data, ridership, passenger miles traveled, et cetera. Some of that information to make sure that there's supporting documentation behind it, that you're accumulating that data properly. So at times we may, if we have questions about certain data or how it should be reported through a specific mode, we may contact FTA. We don't generally have discussions directly with FTA though, unless questions come up.
I guess the question is if you're going through this process, there's no required information to provide the federal transit FTA
So
during this process.
The part that is that does go to FDA is two things. One is that agreed upon procedures for the NTD data, and then the second would be the single audit or the major program. So they do have access to your financial statements, the final financial statements, and they also have access to the single audit report that is our testing over the major program, because that obviously is coming from the FTA, the Federal Transit Cluster dollars all come from the FTA. So they have access to that. They have the ability to do additional procedures to reach out to us based on those audit procedures. Typically, we don't have anything coming from them, but we don't have direct contact. That's more of, we do our testing and then submit that data, and then they have access to it.
So the requirement that MARTA has to present this final audit to them.
Yep.
That's a MARTA requirement, not
That's
yours.
a MARTA requirement, yeah.
Okay. And do you ever, as a result of that, if they were to say there were 10 things in there that MARTA was doing wrong that you thought ought to be corrected, they wouldn't reach out to you on that particular, and they'd come through MARTA. Am I correct in that?
They could reach out a few different ways. Most often with the FTA, I'll say, they will reach out about any concerns, I'll call concerns or findings they have through their triennial audit. So they'll do the FTA will do an audit of MARTA. They'll do their own audit, different scope, but they'll do their own audit, and that's where typically you'll see direct findings or feedback from FTA. They do have the ability as a federal granting agency to do some type of procedure, I'll call it an audit, or some type of review over the audit that we did. That doesn't happen very often, but they do have that. That is a possibility, and they have not done that in my tenure with MARTA.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Brad, I have a question.
Yeah.
I remember a few years ago, we were talking about the need to handle lease agreements. And there was a GASB, I think, that was put forth about how we was going to handle that. And I think it was pretty, at the time, was pretty complicated. And I think we purchased some software to help with controlling and documenting that data. Is that a part of your scope also, to look at that specific area?
Yeah, we continue to look at the leases every year.
Mm-hmm.
The initial implementation was 2 years ago, was the fiscal year 22 audit. You're right, MARTA did purchase, I think Lease Query was the name of the software that you're utilizing to manage all that data. We continue to look at that. So moving forward each year after the implementation, primarily what we're looking at is new leases or leases that have been modified. That's typically where we're going to focus most of our time. But yeah, we continue to look at that each year. That's a testing area. The same for last year's, which was the subscription agreements. We'll continue to look at those new subscription agreements or modifications to those agreements.
Okay, great, great. And then my other question that you mentioned, the data integrity part of your audit, to make sure that what we represent in terms of how we're performing, is that a little bit more forensic in its nature, or you just look at what we present to you?
By data integrity, do you mean like the systems that the data is? So we do, I'll call a baseline level of testing or documentation over that. We'll inquire about the systems being used. We want to make sure some basic information around, are you having backups being performed? Do you have updates being made on the software? We generally are not doing, we're not getting into a lot of the other that would be for the following year. So looking ahead to June 30, 2025, and probably the year that you're kind of in the budgeting stage for, 2 new accounting standards there. Not expecting to have much of a financial impact on either of those. Compensated absences, what that one at a high level, what that GASB is looking at is trying to identify if there's any types of leave or other absences that need to be accrued for that maybe currently are not. I don't anticipate there being a lot of changes here. We'll have some discussions with management to understand if there's any kind of unique leave opportunities that are out there that MARTA offers that maybe aren't accrued. One that I know from an entity that early implemented was time off to volunteer, and that time was not previously required to be required to be accrued for. Under this standard it is. So there could be some things like that, but I don't anticipate anything major. GASB 102, the significant or the certain risk disclosures, there shouldn't be any financial changes from that. What that is looking at is adding additional disclosures in your footnotes about potential risks that are out there. So that could enhance that a little bit. Currently, you may disclose some risks out there about, contingent lawsuits, legal claims, kind of the general information like that. This will kind of expand on that a little bit and maybe ask you to take it a step further and include some more information. Not detailed information, so it's not going to be, hey, list out all of your legal claims, but it may take it a step further and say, are there concerns about funding or et cetera that you have that maybe need to be disclosed? And then GASB 103 is even further away, fiscal year 26. That one was just released a few weeks ago, actually. That one, again, should not have much of an impact. It's going to be mostly more information disclosed in your management discussion analysis section. So that front part of your financial statements, asking for a little bit more information on variances and balances year over year, things like that. But that one is not near as much as when GASB was first talking about the financial reporting model and making changes there was some discussion around some pretty significant changes. They end up backing off a lot of that, and so there's really not expected to be much change. And then obviously the continued operating funding sources and what that looks like over the next few years. I'm sure that's a major point for MARTA and many other transit agencies. That's something we continue to just monitor from an audit standpoint as we continue to look forward at financial viability and those types of things. So that's everything from my standpoint as we look through this year's audit and forward. Again, thank you for giving me a few minutes today. Yeah.
Okay, can we talk just a minute about this risk disclosure? This change is not in this audit, is that right?
Correct.
It's in there?
It'll
Okay.
be in the next audit, the fiscal year 25.
Okay, one of the things I'm curious about is to what you do now regarding risk and legal issues that we're dealing with, like physical, accidents, injuries, lawsuits.
Yep.
And the potential for loss in those. What do you do now regarding that might be different when this changes?
I don't think there'll be anything that'll change there because, again, this new GASB isn't going to require any change to how you record anything. So we do, from a high level, what we're looking at now is we'll have discussions or communications with the general counsel, understand what claims are out there currently at the time, close to when we're going to be issuing the audit report, understand, where those claims are at, the likelihood of whether anything is going to be, whether there's any type of loss there, understand whether anything needs to be accrued for that. That's the general process we go through. We may at times send out attorney letters if you're utilizing outside counsel. We may send out letters to them, again, to understand any claims that they're maybe working on or lawsuits. That's our general process, and that's really to understand, does anything need to be recorded on the financial statements as a liability? Oftentimes it may be something that is settled, but it hasn't been paid out yet, so that would be a timing situation if you need to have a liability on at the end of the year because it hasn't actually been paid, but you've agreed to settle something. This particular GASB, though, is going to be looking more at, like I said, it's going to be looking at other risks, I think, to your operations. And there's still it's still kind of gray, so I'm not exactly sure what you're going to have to put in there. We're trying to discuss with GASB to understand how far you're going to have to go. So as one example for public transit specifically is, you have a lot of the federal dollars or the COVID dollars are going away, have been spent up, if not already spent up, will be spent up within the next year or so. What does that look like? Is there risk related to funding sources, and does that meet the qualifications of this GASB? Do you need to disclose, budgetary concerns? If you're looking at the next year's budget and you have a budget deficit, does that meet the definition of a risk disclosure that needs to be disclosed? So those are the things that we're looking at currently and trying to determine what meets that standards. Fortunately, we have time to get there to make sure we understand exactly what GASB's looking for. But those are more the types of things that I think that'll be potentially disclosed. Like I said, it's not going to be disclosing more information about your potential claims or changing how that's recorded. It's just more disclosure.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none. All right. Thank you, Brad. Appreciate
you.
it very much. Next on our agenda is internal audit activity briefing from Mr. Emil, AGM Internal Audit. All right, Mr. Emil, you have the floor. Thank you.
Mr. Frierson, Mr. Greenwood, members of the MARTA Audit Committee, good morning. Thank you for coming here today and for the opportunity to give you a brief overview of our internal activity and other matters for the period of January 1st to March 31st, 2024. Q3 of MARTA's fiscal 24. Next slide. I will start, as usual, with the operational audit group. We issued 3 audit reports. The first one was an advisory audit report on the MARTA Employee Club. This audit was actually added to the audit plan in addition to our normal audit plan, and came on the heels of our previous audit of the MARTA Employee Charity Club. This employee club is essentially more of a social club, does not get involved into charitable contribution, but just organizes various activities for MARTA employees. We reviewed their statutory findings and other legal compliance matters, identified certain gaps and issues, and wrote an advisory report and submitted that to MARTA management for their consideration of any follow-up actions. The next audit was wayside access and safety. There was a pretty clean audit. There was only one significant findings where we identified a group of folks that had expired wayside certifications. This was an unintended consequences of process that was designed to work very efficiently, but because it was designed to work very efficiently, kind of the outcome of that was certain employees for a period of time kind of dropped out of compliance until they were able to catch up. So they amended the process pretty quickly after they identified that, so I'm very satisfied with the outcome. Truck maintenance audit, also important for MARTA, very clean, only 3 moderate level findings. In addition to that, we were asked to look at the police train patrol pay. That was another engagement that we added to the audit plan in addition to what we had planned for the year. At the end of the quarter, we were in the middle of field work on that one, and as well as the following one, which is the mobility or paratransit service. We were at field work stage for that one audit. So overall, 5 engagements at various different stages of work. Pretty busy quarter for us in general from an operational audit perspective. Next slide. And these are audits that we've discussed previously. It's more of an informational slide for us to continue to track any open findings until they're completed, and that's why we keep this slide still in our slide presentation. We have 7 at various different stages of completion in the CIP program, Capital Improvement Program, 1 in the Office of TOD, and 1 in the HR space. They all have like future implementation dates, so we'll keep them in process until we're satisfied that some of the work has been completed and the issue has been fixed. Let's go to the next slide. This is our IT audit domain. We finished one audit where we audited various different elements of our technology operations. We labeled this audit as a high risk from a rating perspective. We have 5 significant findings and 2 moderate findings. Those 5 significant findings were communicated to management. They have understood and accepted the findings and working on various plans to implement remediation. We will be staying on top of them over the next several months to make sure these things get fixed and we get to a better place. The second audit was in the fieldwork stage. It's still in the fieldwork stage. It's IT software asset management. And behind the benign title of the audit, it's a very important process, because when an organization doesn't know what software assets it has, it cannot patch them or it cannot install security updates. So we want to make sure that at MARTA we know what software we have in place, and that we use that as a basis to then, make sure we're up to date on security updates for those software systems. Next slide. Prior IT audits, again, discussed in prior audit committee meetings, but the IT and cybersecurity teams have been able to reduce the past due findings, which are highlighted in yellow always, from, I believe, 13 in November 2024. That was about 6 months ago, to 3 now. So that's a good level of progress. Obviously, as we do audits, we continue to add findings. That's just the nature of the beast. I think what's important is that findings get addressed. It's not, we'll always have some sort of findings as we do those IT audits, because we hit high-risk areas. But it's important for those things to get addressed and fixed over a period of time. Next slide. Switching to our contract audit group, extremely busy quarter, 39 audits. At the end of March, we were about where we would be in a normal year at the end of June. So a lot of volume that's coming through that. Identified $113,000 in unallowable cost in the overhead rate reviews that we do, and also $921,000 in unsupported cost in change orders and cost price analysis. So just based on the large number of audits, probably something to be expected. Next slide. This is a fraud, waste, and abuse hotline summary. We received a report of equipment failure at one of our facilities that was transferred to operations to fix that. There was an allegation of a station agent using a controlled substance during work hours. That report was transferred to HR and labor relations for a follow-up, which requires a very specific process to follow up. That's very well prescribed in various different policies and statutes. The last one is an allegation of a senior employee providing inaccurate information to the general manager. This allegation was referred to the legal department, and I believe they will use an outside counsel to take a look at that, because this ties to an ongoing litigation. Next slide. This is my usual other internal audit updates. As I mentioned, we added an advisory review of the police train patrol pay to the FY24 internal audit plan. This is just a mandatory disclosure I have to make to the audit committee meeting. The second bullet point, I regret to have to inform the audit committee meeting that Charles Middlebrooks, who served as the Director of Operational Audit and Fraud Investigations for several years, and he was a long-time MARTA audit employee. He passed away last month due to medical condition, very unfortunate and very quick. So we selected Victor Alade to serve as the Acting Director of Operations, Audit and Fraud Investigations until we can fill the positions permanently. Victor has been serving for a number of years as the IT audit manager for MARTA very, very effectively, and I have full confidence that he will continue to support the operational and fraud investigation process and teams in a similarly competent manner. But I just wanted to let the board know that. Next slide. We're going to switch kind of the lens a little bit to more of a forward-looking lens. And over the next several slides, I will talk about the proposed fiscal year 25 internal audit plan. This is an overview slide which talks about the risk assessment process that we go through every year, which is both internal and external. We interview a number of internal stakeholders and executives. as it relates to various different risks faced by MARTA and the risk to the strategy and operations of the organization. We will also do extensive external review of other transit agencies globally to see what some of the risks that may have materialized in those organizations are. We synthesize that information and create an internal audit plan that kind of matches the resources that we have. The internal audit plan is not designed to be set in stone. If new risks pop up, we will adjust dynamically in a very agile manner. And if we decide to change or add engagements to the audit plan, as we have this year, I will disclose that to the audit committee and the board as a matter of practice and requirement. So, not something set in stone, but we need to have a baseline to start and hit the ground running on July 1st. Okay, next slide. We're planning and proposing 12 operational projects, 5 in the information technology audit space. Our contract audit, their ongoing pipeline, we do expect to have an extremely busy pipeline just based on the volume we have this year. I don't expect a reduction next year. I expect more audits to come in next year, and we're going to handle them as we have handled them in the past. That's my commitment to you and to the management team. And then the fraud investigations are unpredictable. They come as they come, and then our operational team kind of decides, whether we're going to handle them or whether they belong somewhere else. So in the next 2 slides or 3 slides, I won't go through every audit, but I just wanted to give you a very quick overview. We have operational audits and informational technology audits that are spanning, can you go back 1 slide? That are spanning various different types of risks. We're trying to cover operational risks. We're trying to cover customer service risks. We're trying to cover risks in our capital program. We're trying to cover compliance risks. So it's kind of a very broad risk lens, and we're trying to cover those with the resources and the audit engagements that we have. I'll just give you some examples. The employee timekeeping audit is more of an operational and financial lens, just making sure that we're recording time accurately and we're paying people what they have earned and not more or less. The rail station management audit is a customer service and compliance audit. Things like, is the station clean? Are the station agents there? Do we have good, safety elements and risks that are covered there, right? Is the PA system working properly? Are those processes well established? So that's a customer service kind of lens. We have bus operations around commercial driver's licenses and related records. That's more of a compliance audit. A couple of what I would call strategic audits. The new rail car delivery readiness. We're spending a lot of money purchasing new rail cars. We want to ensure and provide a level of assurance that the organization is getting ready to receive those cars. Do we have the right facilities, the right tracks, the right train washes? Just a few examples. The 2026 World Cup preparedness. I know 2026 is 2 years from now, but 2 years is not a whole lot of time. So we will work with Rhonda and maybe other executives to just assess, do we have a gliding path towards being very well prepared? It's going to be a big event. We have several audits in the capital program space. This is the first of several, and let's go to the next slide, that we're hoping to do in fiscal 25. And then we will do the compliance audit of the police property and evidence, which is a required audit as part of their CALIA certification. That's the Committee of Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies in the United States. That's required under one of their statutes. And then we've set aside time for supporting the MARTA management audit. So we're not doing the audit, but we're going to be paying a lot of attention to make sure it gets done. And then I'd like to spend a very, very meaningful amount of time on following up on prior audit findings, because it is my firm belief that an audit report that's written by me and my team that gets delivered, but the issues don't get fixed properly, that's not a very good audit report. It doesn't provide the value that it needs to provide. So we need to follow up on those findings and work with management to make sure we're satisfied with the level of remediation. So we're booking some hours against that. And then on the next slide, please, these are the information technology audits. We're going to take another look at our train control and SCADA supervisory control and data acquisition networks, which are used to run our trains and buses. It's a very different technology platform compared to what we're all used to, like emails and networks. And you know, the enterprise network and this network are very different. They have very different underlying technology, and they require different level of assurance from my team. We're spending a lot of time bringing my team up to a technical level of expertise, which they have at this point, to look at this very specialized technology. We're going to look strategically at Windows 10 retirement strategy and user security. Patch management. Patch really means security updates to our infrastructure. And as I said, also previous open audit findings and their remediation. Okay. And then with this, this will conclude my presentation, Mr. Chairman. I will yield the floor back to you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mill. Appreciate it very much. We have questions? Sierra?
Mr. Schell from Crow mentioned that any sort of granular audit requirements would be referred back to your team or IA. Is there any relationship with Crow that allows them to provide feedback or information to inform the internal audit plan?
Yes, there is. We have formal and informal meetings with Brad Shelley from Crow and his managers. So that's one part of the feedback mechanism. The second part is we have started having weekly updates that are with bigger audience within MARTA and Crow. So weekly updates on the work they have done or they have completed and any issues or roadblocks that they potentially could be facing in obtaining information or maybe information that's delayed on our side. We have these weekly updates and as the audit progresses and they possibly could find things, also an opportunity for them to say, hey, you know, we're seeing some, you know, issues that we need to communicate with you. We also have informal meetings, so I feel like there's several layers where we coordinate our audit work, so we don't re-audit the same thing, which is not helpful because it costs money and, you know, creates issues with the auditees. And we also have the opportunity for them to hear from me my concerns, and I've tried to be very transparent with them from a risk perspective, but also for them to be transparent with me as it relates to some of the things that they may be seeing that I need to be aware of.
All right, Mr. Pond and Mr. Floyd next.
We've, excuse me, we've talked about this in the past, SCADA, the train control systems. And I know several years ago, I asked a number of questions there and understand the worst case scenario, the trains can still be run manually. But the systems we have in place now, are there any concerns about today? I mean, what you can share with us, because that's probably one of the most critical systems in the entire MARTA system. So that whole train control, all of that technology that goes with that versus cybersecurity.
So you're absolutely correct. This is a key and critical technology or a portfolio of technologies because there's more than one thing. You know, the train control is one thing, the SCADA is a different thing. We kind of group them together for the sake of the discussion. Critical for the operation of the trains, right? I don't have any specific concerns that I'm aware of, but because of the criticality of this system, it's my job to go and review it from an audit perspective, at least some elements of it. I don't know if that answers the question, but
I can add to that. When it comes to train control, our biggest concern with the train control system right now is just obsolescence. So it's functioning fine, it's safe, it allows the system to operate. We've gotten used to, you know, retooling equipment and finding sourcing where the supplies are. But as time goes on, that becomes a more difficult task. So that's why the most pressing part about our train control system is not whether or not it's working. It can work in its present format for as long as we need it. We don't have a capacity issue on MARTA where we need to run trains closer together and get, you know, the kind of efficiency that a CBTC would do. It's not a necessity. And from a safety perspective, the system's designed to fail safe anyway, so failure would mean stopping of the system. So productivity and safety is okay. It's about keeping up with the time. So that's for me, that's the urgency.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Bill?
Yeah, would you explain to me what patch management is?
Yes, absolutely. And I apologize, this is IT lingo. What I should have probably put there is information security updates and the process that manages the information security updates. And I'll just give you an example. Microsoft comes up with a security update on the first Tuesday of every month, typically. Sometimes if it's a critical update, more often. And this is just one example. Similar security updates are published by Cisco. They're published by Adobe for your Adobe Acrobat. They're published by all the other software vendors. And what this audit is intended to do is to ensure or to verify that MARTA's IT and cybersecurity team have a sustainable and repeatable and effective process for monitoring for those updates and then implementing them after appropriate testing within the MARTA environment. Because it's a pretty heavy lift, it sounds like an easy thing to do, but sometimes you need military type discipline to make sure this thing works all the time. It doesn't stop. You know, the bad guys always figure out a new way to crack the software of some software vendor. And the job of organizations like MARTA and MARTA IT is to get the security update from Microsoft, Adobe, Cisco, etc., Oracle, and to apply them to our environment. And we want to make sure that process works effectively. Does that answer the question?
No, that didn't help me much at all, I'm sorry. But, because I'm not going to understand it probably, but you did convince me that you understand it a little better, so I'm all right with it.
Yeah, Ms. Jones.
Yeah, so I noticed that there is a bus operations audit, and it's very specific to some compliance. My question is regarding when and where is there, I guess, an audit of the actual, the bus operations, like the system itself, because we know what some of the issues are, but is there an opportunity for a more formal evaluation, if there's not one already in place, about how the buses are running and how to improve that service?
So I will answer the question in several parts. We do kind of bits and pieces of operational audits within the bus space. In previous years, we've done bus maintenance audit, for example, auditing the maintenance process. Other times we've looked at on-time performance within that organization, because bus is just way too big of a thing to take in one audit, because we'll never get it done. So we have to break it down in different chunks throughout the different years. I will add something to my answer, though. This year we're going to have the MARTA management audit, which will be done by KPMG. And one of the areas that will be reviewed in that MARTA management audit by KPMG is actually bus operations. Now, I can't tell you exactly what they're going to look at, because they're independent and they have to absolutely, by law, do the audit independently. So they have to decide how and what to look at, but they will be looking at bus operations. So, they will have some sort of feedback at the end of that audit. So they will also provide an element of visibility into the bus operations space for this year. I'm sure we'll continue in the following years to look at different elements of bus operations. I don't know if that answers the question. I hope so.
If I can, just add to that in terms of, not formally in Emil's area, but we are doing a bus operations audit using an outside firm, Argo is the name of the contractor. And they're on site, and they've been on site in the garages doing observation, and they're an international review group. So they're looking at, functional efficiency, they're looking at management style, the whole 9 yards. So I just met with them yesterday to get a summary feedback on what they're finding and then what the steps are. So George and Daniel have a programmatic response in terms of how we're dealing with what the findings are as it happens. So it's not a formal internal audit, but it is an external audit based on best practices around the world, and we're bringing that to MARTA.
All right, any other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you, Mr. O'Mell. Appreciate it very much. Thank you for a
Thank you
wonderful
very much.
report. Thank you. No other questions from the board? Then I would call this meeting to be adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.